This is Your Anxiety Toolkit, episode number 84. Welcome to Your Anxiety Toolkit. I'm your host, Kimberly Quinlan. This podcast is fueled by three main goals. The first goal is to provide you with some extra tools to help you manage your anxiety. Second goal, to inspire you. Anxiety doesn't get to decide how you live your life. And number three, and I leave the best for last, is to provide you with one big, fat virtual hug. Because experiencing anxiety ain't easy. If that sounds good to you, let's go. Welcome back, friends. I am so happy to be here with you again for another episode of Your Anxiety Toolkit. So super exciting things happening over here. I know I've been saying that a lot, and it's not because I'm overreacting. Really exciting news. So let's just get through all the things I need to tell you first, and then I'm going to get you straight to the episode, because if you have social anxiety, or you know someone with social anxiety, or you just would like to improve your anxiety around other people and social settings, this is going to be the episode for you. But first, I have a couple of things I want to mention. So, number one, there will be the return of a free training that is called the 10 Things You Need to Know About OCD. We did offer this last year, so if you didn't get to see that free training, I would love nothing more than to share it with you. It will be available on January 28th. I'm thinking I'll probably run it for about 6 days. And so I'm so excited. If you want to do that, it's just a short webinar training. You can watch it on your video at home from your PJs, and it will be wonderful if you're new to OCD and you're wanting to get more information about how to treat it and what's it about and how to manage it. Even if you're not new to OCD, it will probably be super helpful because I'll be hitting the main points that you'll need to know to sort of keep you or redirect you into the right direction. So that will be available January 28th. You can go to cbtschool.com and click on the free resources button, and it'll take you straight there. All right, so before we get started, let's go straight to the We Can Do Hard Things segment. Now, this is a segment we do. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. Every week we do a segment where members of the Facebook group CBT School Campus, which is a Facebook group, it's a closed Facebook group. So if you want to join it, you will have to ask to join. But each week we post and everyone gets to share the hard things that they've been doing. So this week we have a note from Cosman, and he says this, and you're going to love it. Choosing to sit in anxiety while it reaches overwhelming levels and trying to delay the escape. At one point, I fail and I give in. Accept this, and then I try again and again and again with a smiley face emoji. And you guys, the reason I love this message was because I think it's real. It's a real understanding of what it's like to do hard things. And what he's sharing here is that he had a willingness. He showed up with a willingness to be in the anxiety, even though, like he said, he had this experience of wanting to delay that feeling. But he gave himself permission, right, to feel the feelings. And then if he didn't do so great, he gave himself permission to accept that he didn't do so great. And I love this. I think this is the work, right? Which is, it's this, I often say to clients, it's this back and forward between trying and forgiving and trying and forgiving and trying and forgiving. And I want you to sort of imagine me just moving my head back and forward to show that, like a teeter-totter, that that's the way this works. So thank you so much, Cosman. I think that you really gave us an input and a view of what it's like to do hard things, because it's not always a win all the way. It might be partly a win and partly forgiveness and acceptance, which I love, love, love. Okay, let's get to the show. Today, you guys are going to love this episode because I loved it. I'm actually grinning as I share this with you. Today, I got to interview probably one of my best friends. And the cool thing about this is not only is this a really, really good friend of mine, she's also an OCD therapist. And we talk every day. And we share, what we're working on and what our wins were. And it has been so beautiful to have Michelle Massi, who is the interview guest today, as a partner in crime for me. I do have a couple of other partners in crime that are coming up very, very soon. But I really am so thrilled to share with you a relaxed conversation her and I had where we recorded an interview and an episode talking about all things social anxiety. Now, Michelle Massi is her name. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist. She's an OCD specialist and an anxiety specialist, and she has a private practice in Encino and Westwood. These are both in Los Angeles. And she also works at the UCLA OCD intensive treatment program. And she knows her stuff. I ain't gonna lie. It's really, really fun. So Michelle is a superstar when it comes to managing anxiety and working with clients. And I'm so thrilled to share with you this episode. We talk about symptoms of social anxiety, roadblocks to social anxiety treatment, what kind of treatment tools she uses versus what I use. We share some fun stories about different activities and exercises and exposures we do with our clients. So it's a super fun episode, and I'm so happy to share it with you. And I do hope that if you are someone who struggles with social anxiety, that you find it super, super informative and a teeny tiny bit inspiring, because that was our hope. So I'm just go straight to the interview. Have a wonderful day. Go to cbtschool.com if you would like to sign up for the free webinar, and I'll see you guys next week. Actually, I'll talk to you guys next week. Have a wonderful one.
This is actually a really, really exciting interview for me because Michelle is probably one of my best friends in the States, and she is probably one of the biggest rock star ERP therapists that I know. And so I'm so excited to share with you a conversation we're going to have with you guys around social anxiety. So welcome, Michelle.
Thank you. That introduction was like way too kind, but I appreciate it.
No, it's the truth. This is so fun for me because it feels like we're taking a walk together and we're just going to talk about cases. So I feel very, very relaxed and excited about this. So
hopefully I'm not in as much pain this week as I was last week after our real walk.
I did make her go up some crazy huge hills. I did. But you totally survived it. You kicked butt.
I did.
We can do hard things, right?
Yeah. Definitely.
So this will be much easier on your body, but much harder on your mind. We're going to talk a lot about social anxiety. It's something that you guys have been mentioning to me that you want to hear about more. And it's something that I know we both treat, and I actually really love to treat social anxiety. It's super fun. And so I wanted to have Michelle come on and share with us, comparatively what she does and what I do, and talk about some fun ways to look at social anxiety and to manage it. So Michelle, tell us about what is social anxiety? Like what symptoms would you need to have to classify or clarify for that?
Oh, that's one of those questions. It's like I intuitively know it, but to like give a definition. So I definitely look for somebody who struggles in social settings, either one-on-one with somebody or in large groups. It doesn't, I think we have this misnomer that social anxiety is only in large groups, and it definitely can be in one-on-one relationships or one-on-one, conversations. It's typically somebody who experiences a lot of anxiety in those situations and is often worried about embarrassing themselves, saying something stupid, doing something stupid, not saying just the right thing. Often shows physical symptoms, heart racing, maybe some sweating, and lots of avoidance. They avoid these situations. I have a ton of kids I work with who have social anxiety and they don't participate in class discussions. They don't want to get called on. They don't even want to raise their hand, even if they know the answer, because they're afraid, what if I say the wrong answer? What if everybody laughs at me?
Right.
That's what I see a ton of.
Right. I often will, and just to add to that, I often see clients who they're either afraid to be judged or they're sometimes just afraid that people will see that they're anxious.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Yep.
and so it doesn't have to, I mean, I think the most important thing, as you've just said, is like, it's not a cookie cutter. It never looks the same.
Yep. Yep.
Right.
The other thing that comes up a lot with my clients is, especially with one-on-one conversations, is that the person feels that they have to continue the conversation. That it's their job to carry the conversation. And if the conversation dies, it's all their fault. And, back to the judging, other people will judge them that they can't carry the conversation. There must be something wrong with them.
Right. Yeah. Which is so, I mean, I actually have to keep having conversations of like, no, everybody has awkward,
right?
Everybody,
exactly.
Like, no matter, even those who aren't having anxiety have those awkward pauses.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that you're a faulty human being.
Right. But they definitely think remember a date I was on years and years ago, and I couldn't have a conversation with the guy. I'm like, this is what I do for a living. I talk to people. Like, what is wrong?
Right.
So it was funny.
Right. And so what do you think? Why do you think some people have, and like you've just sort of given an example, why do you think some people have anxiety with just one person? And then someone else with social anxiety has it with big groups and they're fine in the one person scenario. Like, what is your experience of that?
Why each person? I don't know. I mean, I think that's back to like, there's no cookie cutter for anxiety or social anxiety or even OCD. Like if we compare to contamination OCD, we have one person who has a fear of germs and getting sick themselves, another person who has a fear of somebody else getting somebody else sick, right? And the third person who it's just gross. So right. I think that's sort of the social anxiety version of that, is that some people, and I had this client, he can make conversation with people in grocery store lines, no problem. He's like, oh yeah, that's not a big deal. It's easy. But get him in a room with a family member, even his like nephew, and or brother-in-law, he's like in absolute panic, because it's like, there's that expectation of, when to carry on that conversation. And then I think with people in large group settings, it's that they won't fit in, or they won't look to a bigger group that they have, that they're intelligent enough, or if they make a mistake, it's going to be in a bigger group of people.
Right. Yeah. And for me, actually, I have seen multiple cases that also have a vulnerability factor of that it feels just so wrong in those vulnerable situations. So they're sort of also fending off that as well.
Yeah, right. Definitely.
All right. Okay. So I want to get your idea of like, what does a typical session look like for you when you're treating social anxiety?
Again, so it depends on where their anxiety stems from, whether, again, is it group, is it individual, what are they avoiding? So some of my favorite ones are walking around and, taking pictures and posting to Facebook, because they'll avoid posting things on Facebook, or even just looking weird, taking pictures, because if they're taking a selfie, people will walk by and judge them for taking ridiculous pictures. I think one of my ultimate favorite, and I always throw this out there, is I have a boa, and everybody's like, what's a boa? Not the snake. I have a feather boa in my office, and yes, it's totally from bachelorette parties. I think I actually have a black one and a white one, and I may even have a pink one in there. And that's one of my favorite exposures for especially guys, because girls, we wear them all the time. It doesn't look that strange, but especially guys. I had one of my clients one time who agreed to take it home and wear it on the beach in Santa Monica. And he was flabbergasted when he came back. He's like, nobody paid attention to me. Not one person looked at me. And I was like, yeah, it's kind of Santa Monica,
Right.
Some of my other favorite ones are, going in and making mistakes or making other people feel uncomfortable. So like going into a grocery store or a restaurant and taking a really long time to order, or having a client ask a really dumb question. Like, one of my favorite is Blockbuster obviously is no longer open. So this still works, but near my office, there used to be like a Hollywood Video. So we'd go ask if anybody knew where Blockbuster Video was in the Hollywood Video store. And even now, asking where Blockbuster Video is, obviously they've been bankrupt and gone for years. So, I like also, going into like Chick-fil-A and asking for a burger, or going into, my office at UCLA is on UCLA's campus, and there's a huge rivalry with USC. And so going around and asking how to get to USC from UCLA, so those are some of my favorite, because it's so goofy and it makes the person so uncomfortable. And that's the purpose of the exposure around, social anxiety.
Right. How do you get people on board? So do you explain to them the process and the purpose of exposure and response prevention? What is the process before you start doing exposures?
Great question. Yeah, I just kind of like to throw them into the sharks, right? No, I mean, whenever I'm treating somebody, I'm obviously doing a ton of psycho ed, how our body and brain works the way it does, why we're reacting, that it's really a false alarm, very similar to OCD or other anxiety disorders, and give sort of the background of that and show what exposure looks like. And to be honest, I do a little bit more TLC, tender loving care, with social anxiety, and do a little bit more cognitive reframing than I do with OCD, because we're not really talking about worst case scenario all the time in the same degree as we are with OCD. And so I usually will give the story, I'm walking down the street, I have severe social anxiety, and I see a group of people and they're laughing. And I always ask my clients, what do you think they're laughing at? And of course, anybody with social anxiety is obviously going to say me, for sure. And then I ask them to come up with alternatives. And we're not, I never give reassurance. So and I make sure clients understand, we're not reassuring you that everything is fine and that you aren't being laughed at, because I don't know those people. But we come up with some alternatives. So we look at that, and I show them how we can look at our distortions, and why we think, everybody's looking at us. My clients will be walking down the street and think everybody, while they're walking down the street, is looking at them. And the reality is, especially with cell phones these days, people walk into poles all the time because they're not paying attention, or they're so into their own head and their own thoughts that they're so focused on that. There's no way they're focused on you. So I talk a lot about that and the reality testing of what's going on. And then I explain why it's important to do exposures and to learn to tolerate that. Yeah, these people may be laughing at you, and we really can't control what other people think of you, but that doesn't have to impact you. The only reason it's impacting you is because you're allowing room for it to impact you.
Right. And so I agree. I think that a lot of times when I'm talking with social anxiety clients, I talk to them about that spotlight effect of how people with social anxiety think that the spotlight's on them. But based on science, we know that most people are thinking about themselves or thinking about future disasters, or, doing their own
100%.
Catastrophizing as well. Yeah. And so I think it's us training ourselves to not assume that it's always about us, and to give multiple. I mean, I agree with you on the reassurance piece, in that I just like them to at least recognize it could be multiple other things. That person might be looking down because their grandma just died, not because they're avoiding you, right? They might be squeezing their face because they've got a massive stomach ache, not because they hate you and think that you're ridiculous.
Right. And I do a lot of modeling of my own thoughts or behaviors, or I'll have the client and I take a walk with me and just kind of observe what they're noticing with other people, or we'll sit at a coffee shop and we'll kind of watch people, because the reality is that, we're also focused on what's in front of us. And even if they were to notice something, or someone was to notice them, I ask them, how long do you think they're really going to be focused on that? And I have this story of this person I would see in Westwood, who really struggled, what I can only assume with severe mental illness, but he would run around screaming in Westwood, and he was screaming in another language, which is the only reason why I noticed, was I was trying to figure out what language he was speaking, right? And I tell clients, while I still can bring that story to mind, the only time I'm thinking about it is when I'm telling them that story, Otherwise, I'm not thinking about it all the other times of the day. And so even if somebody were to notice that they've done something weird, it's how much is that really going to impact them if the person within 5 seconds is no longer thinking about them, and no longer sort of engaging with them.
Right. And just to add to that, I think the one of the biggest distortions I see, particularly with younger adults and teens, is this idea that if I make a mistake, people will just stop being friends with me.
Yeah.
That people that they think their friends and their, community will drop them like a hat the minute they make a mistake, which has a little perfectionism to it. But it's like, no, you make a mistake and I'm actually relieved that you made a mistake because now I don't have to be perfect either. Right? Instead of their mindset is, if I make a mistake, they'll leave me and go and be with the other perfect human beings who don't make mistakes, which is just irrational. Right. Yeah,
Absolutely.
I agree. I think that there are so many huge distorted thoughts involved with social anxiety. And I would say to the listeners, like, be careful around spending too much time restructuring, but it is helpful to do at the start. Would you agree?
Totally agree. And I say the same thing. You want to make sure during an exposure not to restructure anything, not to try to figure out the cognitive distortions, but go with worst case scenario. I'm walking down the street and yep, all these people are looking at me and I've said something stupid or I've acted weird and people are going to drop me and not be my friend. And I really try and only do some reframing or reality testing sort of outside of that time period, but very little, just kind of okay, this is what you think, I'm not going to go to that party because everybody will, stare at me and I'll have nothing to add to the conversation. And I'm probably better, they wouldn't want to see me there anyway. And we talk about like, really, is that really the case? But let's go with it. That might be the case, but let's go anyway to the party.
Right. Absolutely. All right. So you do some cognitive restructuring, you educate them on why exposure is like the bomb.
Right. Of course.
And then this is actually a question I'm asking you for me too.
Okay.
What do you do to get them to step out of that fight, fright, and freeze that they have to do it? Because often right across the street from my office is this outdoor mall. It's a great place to do exposures. And I'll often go out with my clients, but there'll be sometimes where they'll be like, oh yeah, I'm going to go and ask that guy for a quarter, which is uncomfortable for them as an exposure. And they go to do it. And then all of a sudden I'm standing back and I'm watching them and they just stop. So what do you do in those situations where they just get totally frozen?
That's a great question. I think we do a lot of planning for that before going out. So it's like, okay, when you get frozen, what can you do? And so sometimes clients will walk away and then go back and find somebody else and sort of like take a breath. I think sometimes, especially when we're doing exposures in person and I'm standing there with them, is that, they can hear me and they're just like, I don't want to go back to Michelle and tell her I failed this exposure. I didn't get to do it. And so they'll like, I have one client who will say something really fast, like, can I have that quarter? And I'm like, what did you just say? Like,
you're like, not counted. And
the best part is that actually makes them look more weird than if they had just said, can I have a quarter? Or do you know the time? Right. So, if they get stuck, the other thing is I'll have them step back for a second and think about, is there a question they could ask that would maybe be a little less anxiety provoking? Is asking a quarter too weird feeling for them or too anxiety provoking for them? Is asking for the time instead something, the average person does. And so maybe seems less weird, but will be a little bit less, lower on their hierarchy.
Right.
But yeah, it's a work in progress. I think just like any sort of exposure is we're facing our scariest fears. And so it's I'm sweating and people will notice that I'm sweating, or, my heart is pounding and people will notice that I look frightened, and tolerating that experience. So sometimes we go back and have a little powwow and try again.
Right. A little pep talk, right?
Yeah.
Right. It's sometimes I think we need, particularly coming to social anxieties, we do need a little pep talk sometimes to be like, you can do it. Yeah. Okay. So you're going to look like a fool. All right.
Right.
I love to actually look like a fool first, just to show them. And I think that's
great. Yeah.
A version of like restructuring thoughts is, if I go and do it, automatically they have evidence that the world doesn't break apart. If I, walk into the ice cream store and ask for a notepad, you know what I mean?
Right.
Ask for something random. Right.
Yeah.
All right. So this is amazing. So how do you apply mindfulness to the practice and, the treatment of social anxiety?
Well, I always encourage my clients to do meditation between sessions in general because it's, again, I don't want them to necessarily doing mindfulness during the exposure or meditation during the exposure because I want them to feel that anxiety. But I use mindfulness during the exposure of having them have an awareness of what they're experiencing in their body. And then again, just sort of what they're experiencing, sort of using their senses to notice what's going on around them during the exposure. Are people really looking at them? Are people really laughing at them? Or what are other people doing? And again, checking in with their body as to, where they're feeling their anxiety most and whether or not they're willing to tolerate that.
Right. Agree. It's a lot about just the willingness to ride that wave, right? Right.
Yep.
And then sort of move into radical acceptance. Like I think that one thing I find my social anxieties doing after exposure sessions is they spend a ton of time then reviewing whether people judge them or not, and I often try to have them move into a place of like radical acceptance after like it's done. Maybe you've been judged, maybe you haven't. Like let's lay that down and move on. So I think that's an important piece because you could do the exposure, but then if you walk away and review for the next hour, it might be undoing a little bit of that work.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. What advice do you give your clients after exposure sessions?
To just really sit and tolerate that, as you said, that people may have been judging them or they may have looked weird, and that, look, you survived it, you tolerated it, that the world didn't explode, as you said, that even if people judge them, that doesn't have any impact on the next thing they go do. The only time it's going to impact them is if they're sitting and ruminating about it. But they don't, it's not going to impact whether they're going to be able to study for their exam or whether they can pass their exam or whether or not they can go grocery shopping or watch a TV show, and just allow them to give space for the discomfort. And also try to have them be aware of what instances in that next week between sessions where they can practice, asking weird questions, or even, again, it doesn't even have to be a weird question. It can be a normal question. It's like, what is the time? You don't have to ask, where is Blockbuster, right? You can go do things in public, thinking about what are all the things that you avoid? Is there something that you're willing to do in the next week where we can practice this? Because I remind clients, the more we practice this, the less anxiety you're going to have, just because it now becomes second nature. Whereas if we only practice it every once in a while, we're still sort of almost putting it on a pedestal as like giving it, adding fuel to the fire, if you would, giving it credence that there's something wrong and there's something we should be scared of.
Right. Absolutely. I think often with clients that I have, for those who are listening who feel like some of the exposures we're talking about are just absolutely crazy chaos. And if you feel that way, that is totally normal, right? Yeah. I always tell clients you should not enjoy sessions and you should not want to see me. Like if you want to see me, I'm not doing a very good job, right?
Right.
But I often explain to those who are starting off is a really great start off exposure might be just giving eye contact. Or smiling at a stranger and starting really small. So what small exposures do you have clients start with?
Actually, exactly that. We'll have them walk down the street and smile, make eye contact, and maybe even say hello, but a lot of just looking up and not looking, and even if not making eye contact necessarily, just looking up and not looking down at the ground or, up. And seeming like they could be making eye contact. Sitting in a Starbucks, and people watching, or, another coffee shop and people watching, versus hiding or not going out at all. And starting, again, if even walking down the street feels too big, starting for, can I walk down the block? Can I walk around the corner?
Right. Absolutely. Or even like maybe just in your office, if that's where you work, or like with your teacher or something, if you're in school. Right. Yeah, I think that's a huge piece. Now, do you do any work with body language or posture when you're dealing with social anxiety? Because I know it's something that I have had to address quite often.
Absolutely. We kind of, again, look at if we're anxious, what are we likely to be doing with our body in that moment that might be looking a little bit strange that people could be looking at. If I'm, walking around with my arms crossed and I've got this scowl on my look, on my face, or this panic look on my face, could people be actually kind of concerned about me and looking at that, right? So trying to have as neutral body language as possible. Also looking not just at what people see, but sort of our experience. I have one client who will describe that when he's talking to people, his toes will curl. So it's trying to have an awareness of uncurling his toes. I have a ton of clients who, bounce their legs. And so it's like, okay, let's just try and tolerate the anxiety without getting it out there. So we have the body language that other people are noticing, but also the body language of our anxiety just, going through our system.
Right. Yeah. I really feel like, let's say if I'm at you and I go to the conference, the OCD conference every year, and, you're with thousands of people and some of the best clinicians in our area. And it is sort of intimidating, right? And so I often have to check in with myself on, how is my body holding up? Like, am I squeezing my shoulders? Or, there's something really powerful. I know Charla nicely speaks a lot about pulling our shoulders back. And I find that to be really helpful when doing exposures, because if you can imagine, like, even listening right now, if you're listening, I want you to clench your fists and pull your shoulders forward and like pull your chin in. That's a really anxious position to do an exposure in. And so, pull your shoulders back, raise your head up, like you said, I think is super important.
Yeah. And there's that whole like Superman or Superwoman stance too, right, that we, feel more confident if our shoulders are back and our hands are, on our hip or by our sides. And so walking around like that, and, back to the conferences, I know, like, when I'm around somebody who I'm a little bit intimidated by or excited to be around, right, I notice that my voice, I start talking sort of pressured speech. So it's not necessarily body language, but it's also, how are our talking patterns? Right. So having an awareness, and that's a great place where I bring mindfulness in, is like, what, body scan of like what's going on with my body.
Right. Yeah. Let me tell you a story. You just reminded me of the most embarrassing thing that happened to me at a conference. I think it was last year. So Michelle, I'll tell the listeners. So Michelle and I are sitting at a bar, I think we were sitting, and this man comes over, and you're like waving to this person, this person. And so this person comes over and sits down. Well, I don't know this person. So I just start chatting with them. And then I say, so what do you treat? What's your specialty? And Michelle literally opens your eyes and stares at me, because this is one of the most well-known hoarding specialists in the world. Right. And he looked at me, he even laughed at me, because he was like, this chick has no idea what she's talking about. But the reason I share that, and the reason I think that is so interesting, is had I known that he was a hoarding therapist genius, I would have had anxiety just because of the thoughts of knowing who this human is. But I asked him as if he was just, Joe Blow. And that's the power of our expectations and how much we can make a big deal about things. Because here I am, I was literally just sort of as if I was chatting to the waiter, ultimately, which, is super embarrassing. And I still am blushing just thinking about it.
And I totally forgot about that until you were just telling that story. I was like, oh, yeah. It's a great moment.
I know, but if anyone's going to make a total fool of themselves like that, it will be me for sure.
Yeah.
I just need you to be like that person on The Devil Wears Prada, where they whisper in your ear who the person is before the person comes. It's like, that's the hoarding specialist, just so I know.
Right. Yeah.
So I think it's important that the reason I tell that story is just because we think this is a huge deal doesn't actually mean it's a huge deal. This therapist told me who he was, and he laughed at me, and we just kept having a conversation, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? And maybe he'll judge me forever, but if so, so be it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
He's probably, with his students telling stories. Oh my God, this girl asked me. what I treat. It was the craziest thing.
I know, and I radically accept that. I'm the girl who put my foot in it. That's just who Kimberly is. Yeah, I mean, so I tell that story to normalize, like, it's okay. It's okay if we make a mistake, Join the club.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm the person who's constantly tripping at work on the stairs.
Right. I love it.
Yeah.
That's it. And that's okay. Even I think it's okay to be the girl, like air quotes, to be the girl who asks silly questions. Like, that's okay too. Right.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah.
All right. So let's go back to some, like, do you have a standard set of exposures that you have all clients do?
I think I have everybody start with walking around and smiling and making eye contact. That's typically what I would say most of my clients do. Mm-hmm. And then it sort of depends on, how willing the person is, and sometimes also age appropriate. Like, I'll have clients go do cartwheels down the road. Not saying that my 60-year-old clients can't do that, but it's a safety concern. Right. So, sometimes my 25-year-old clients are a little bit more willing to do that. And so I like doing cartwheels because, number one, not everybody can do them. Doing them, even if you can do them, looks strange if you're just doing them on the sidewalk. Right. But if you can't do them, that's even that much better of a layer. A lot of times, especially with the millennials, posting stuff on Facebook, sometimes posting things that are incorrect, or even text messaging friends something that sounds funny or is spelled incorrectly. I do a lot of those exposures. I really do a ton of going into stores and restaurants and really just asking either direct questions like, what time is it? Or really stupid questions. Obvious, like, what time do you close? Or making a phone call, calling up a store and asking what their phone number is. Another one I like to do when I'm in Westwood is I have clients make a poll and stand on the corner and ask people if they'd be willing to answer these questions. And it's amazing. Sometimes you'll get, the average person who's like, I don't have time for this, and they'll walk, and then they'll have to deal with the rejection, which is great. And then you'll actually get people who will stop and really be willing to participate, and then they have to deal with that. So that's always a fun one too.
Right. My old office used to be right next to the Trader Joe's, and we would always make signs and go and give free hugs.
Oh, that's a good one.
It's so fun because I think the reason I love this exposure, and I try to get as many clients as I can to do it if they're willing, is people actually get a really good insight as to what other people are thinking. Because you would assume, giving big sign that you've handmade on cardboard that says free hugs, you would assume most people would be like, freak, you know what I mean?
Right.
But people are like, oh my gosh, you have no idea how much I needed that, or you made my day. And I think people actually then get a better view of the world is really hungry for connection. They're not hungry for rejection. They don't want to reject you. They want to connect with you.
Yeah, right? Definitely.
So I love giving free hugs.
Yeah.
Plus, it's totally my style. I love a free hug. What I would add is, for me, one of the things that everybody knows that I give as pretty standard ERP for social anxiety is to join Toastmasters. I love that as an exposure. So for those who don't know, Toastmasters is a group. It's a nonprofit. I don't know if it's a nonprofit or not. But
I don't remember, but
it's a big organization. They're all around the world, and they meet either weekly or monthly or however their schedule, and they practice public speaking. But it's often people who are beginners to advanced, people with social anxiety. So I love that if anyone wants to give that a shot.
The other one I use in addition to Toastmasters is just meetup groups, because there's a ton of meetup groups. I don't remember how much Toastmasters costs, but some of my clients struggle with the cost of it. So meetup.com is great because, there's oftentimes activities that don't cost any money, or there's not an ongoing fee, so that they can, go do social interactions that way as well.
Love it. Yeah. Totally great point. Yeah. And you can find like-minded individuals too. Like, you can find the chess club if you're into chess or hiking.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I love it.
Exactly.
Okay, so let me ask you a couple more questions. All right, so some people have secondary social anxiety. Often people will message me on Instagram or email and say, I never used to have social anxiety, but then because now I have OCD and I'm doing compulsions and in public, or an eating disorder or whatever it might be, now because of this primary disorder, I have secondary social anxiety. So what advice would you give those people who are now anxious because they're doing a behavior that's, a problem for them?
Yeah, I see a lot of that at UCLA because there's just so much comorbidity between especially severe OCD and other anxiety disorders. And sometimes it's related to the OCD, like you said, like I'm now doing this strange compulsion and people are noticing and I don't want other people to see me. And other times there's just because there's been so much avoidance and they stay home now there's that anxiety of going out. So it's that double layer. And I just, sort of reinforce why exposure is really important and that they can do exposures for two things at the same time and really use that learning model in order to try to extinguish. And obviously, if the social anxiety is related to the OCD, then if they're or the eating disorder, if they're treating the primary disorder, then in theory, the anxiety from the social aspect will decrease as they're going out and doing sort of more just everyday things. If they're going out and doing exposures for the OCD or the eating disorder and they're sitting in restaurants eating more frequently, then that will just have an effect on the social anxiety because they'll have to be out, they'll be engaging with people.
Right.
Yeah.
And what advice would you give those who are panicking? So let's say they have panic disorder, they're full-fledged into a panic, and now they've got this. Not only are they managing their panic, but they're managing how people are judging them for crying, breathing funny, melting down. What advice do you give in those situations?
Again, similar to just the social anxiety in general, is that let's say I'm going to go out to my grocery store and I have a panic attack there. Number one, people are pretty empathetic when you start, having that freak out because a lot of people, freak out in these situations, or if I think about on an airplane having a panic attack, there's a lot of people with fear of flying and that they can just empathize with like, oh yeah, I've been there. Also, most of the time, the people I see at the grocery store week to week, I'm not seeing the same person. So even if I have a freak out and I'm crying, it's not likely that I'm going to see these people again, Right. And so, which I'm not trying to give a reassurance. It's more kind of a reframe that I might see them again. There are certain people I see at the grocery store every week. But again, the likelihood that I'll see those same people and that they'll be like, oh, there's that girl who did that weird thing. It's much more likely that they're going to be like, oh, how are you feeling this week? And be more empathetic about it. Yeah. And again, doing the exposures for the panic.
Right. Yeah. And just letting it like, it's okay if you cry. Like, right. I think that's the point. Like when I'm doing exposures sometimes for any disorder that I'm treating, I say to them, like, it's okay if you need to cry, like cry, let it out. Like, again, let's see whether the world dumps you because you cried that one time at the supermarket. Probably not.
Well, it's like, therapists will ask questions on our Facebook groups of, what do you do in this situation when a client has a panic attack in session? And my everybody's like, oh, I do some mindfulness and I, have them check in with their senses and everything. And I'm like over here, like, yeah, I just let them have it because we, like that's the experience we want. I can empathize that it's pretty awful feeling when you're having a panic attack, but I want you to learn to run through it. The panic attack's not going to kill you. The crying in public isn't going to break you. You will be, I'm sure you've seen people cry in public. I know I have. And I think to myself, wow, I wonder what they're struggling with. And then I go on and finish my shopping and it's sort of everyday life.
Right. It's just human. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I'll add this, and people will probably like screw their nose up at this, but I've even had clients who will say, no, I can't do this because I'll get so anxious, I'll throw up. Right. And I'll be like, okay, like, even if you're panicking so hard that you throw up, that's still okay too. Like, I don't want you to now be afraid of panic because of this scary thing that happened. Like, So,
Right.
if you are going to do an exposure and it means for social anxiety that you full on sweat like you're a basketball player, okay, go and sweat.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
If your fear is that people will notice that you've got rings under your arms, that's what I'm going to make you do. And you'll learn that you can survive that.
Yeah. When I'm at UCLA, I had a client the other day say to me, but I'm going to pass out. I'm like, well, we're right by the hospital. I'll call 911 and they'll come get you. I'm not concerned.
Right.
So it's like,
let's just take a risk.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're like, no, but you don't understand.
Right. I'll add to that story is I had a client once come in, and I tell this story. I know I've probably told her on the podcast before, but he came in and he sat down on my couch and he said, Kimberly, if you can just teach me how to not sweat, I'll be fine. And I was like, okay, then. I can't teach you how to not sweat, but I can teach you how to accept sweat. You know what I mean? And he did not like that, but he got on board, and it ended up being that after he accepted sweating, he sweat less.
Yeah.
Right? To the point where it wasn't noticeable anymore. But he came in and he was like, I'll pay you however much money you need to teach me how to not sweat. And I was like, I'm sorry, I got nothing.
And I'm laughing over here because as I'm listening to you, I'm like, oh my God, did I put on deodorant this morning?
The good thing is that the podcast isn't like a scratch and sniff. You can't smell.
But you gotta this is a perfect example of pop-ins that we have when we have anxiety, right? And even when you don't have anxiety, is that these things may be popping into your head and they have no bearing on anything. It's like, all right, if I didn't put on deodorant, I guess I will go put on deodorant later.
Right. Or I'll just smell.
My poor husband.
No, he deserves it.
I'll tell him you said that.
Oh, good. You must. Okay, well, this has been so good. I love it so much. So tell us how people can find you and find out about you. Where can we get in contact?
So I am based in LA near Kimberly, and I have an office in Encino and West LA where we treat all of the anxiety disorders and other disorders that are similar. And you can find me at anxietytherapyla.com. That's my website. That's the easiest way to get a hold of me. And it's been awesome being on the podcast. Thanks for having me.
You're brilliant. Any social media too?
I have a Facebook and an Instagram page that I kind of update as I'm feeling like something pops in my head or I come across something, but I don't do it regularly.
Sure. So go to your website is your place to go.
Website.
Yeah. Oh, it's so good. I love, we didn't get to walk, but we did get to chat.
We did. Yes. I love it.
All right. Well, thank you. Is there anything else you want to mention?
No, I think that's it. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And we'll have you back on because I know we've got plans to do some stuff here later on in the year.
Yes, I love it.
Okay. Yay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please note that this podcast or any other resources from cbtschool.com should not replace professional mental health care. If you feel you would benefit, please reach out to a provider in your area. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for supporting cbtschool.com.